Hey everyone, welcome back to the Modern Customer Podcast. I am your host, Blake Morgan. Part of what I do as a customer experience futurist is I'm looking at the horizon of what's happening down the road. Kasey Lobaugh is the chief futurist for Deloitte's consumer industry. And so on the Modern Customer Podcast today, we are talking about his view of the future and how he is looking at more than just predictions. And we talk so much about their new report called Buying Into Better, the Future of the Consumer Industry. In this report, Deloitte identified the 6 forces critical to navigating the next decade of change for the retail industry, and it examines the implications across 3 dimensions of business, including markets, models, and mechanics. We talk a lot about what's actually relevant in this report for you listening to this show, watching this show, that have the word customer in your title. So we talk quite a bit about this report as it relates to customer experience. So please enjoy this episode with Kasey Lobaugh. Kasey, welcome to the Modern Customer Podcast. Are you in Kansas City right now?
I am in Kansas City right now.
Okay, so are you still recovering from all the partying from winning the Super
Yeah,
Bowl this weekend?
yeah, it was crazy. In fact, today in Kansas City is the celebration event. They've had a red snow day, so the kids aren't in school, and most everybody else is downtown partying and celebrating.
Oh, that's
But luckily, I
awesome.
went. What was it? 2 years ago when we won the Super Bowl, Kansas City won. I was able to go then, so I'm here today.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Well, welcome to the show. Today we're talking about the new Deloitte report. You have worked at Deloitte. It seems like your whole career, and you started as an intern. Isn't that
I
right?
did. I did some. I think it was 27 years ago.
What a
Started with
good
an intern.
internship.
Yeah, it was right. It was during business school. So between my first and second year in business school, I did an internship with Deloitte, and they gave me an offer, and here I am.
Wow, that is so rare these days, but very cool. And I think what's so cool about the consulting firms is that you guys are really able to do so much great research on customer experience. So before we get into this new report that you've released, can you just talk about the process of releasing one of these reports? I understand you surveyed 800 people. How does that work?
Yeah, well. So we decided to take on this topic, and that really was the genesis of even starting the work. And the topic was to think about a little further out, perhaps, than we normally think. So we like to say in consulting, we're good with helping our clients over the next 2 and 3 years. But we were starting to get a sense that there were quite a few things that were happening that were maybe different than the changes we had experienced over the last 20 years, I would say, even in the consumer industry. Some pretty significant things started to happen. So we decided we wanted to start thinking about the future, and we wanted to research it. And we can refer to it as a report, but really for us, it's a platform. It's a broader platform about how we're studying and bringing information to our clients. And yes, there is a report, but for us, it's a broader platform. So as we started that process, part of what I had to think about was, I've been around the industry long enough to know there's filled with bad predictions of the future, prophecies and predictions, and there's a long list. And I didn't want to be part of that collection. So the question was, how would we do this differently so that we wouldn't be part of that collection? And really, the way we went about it was, let's go study and talk with a lot of people, gain really broad input, and frankly, don't make any predictions. And you'll see that as you read through. We study the forces, we study the implications of those forces, we study, what it might mean for the industry. But within that, there's no predictions, but rather an informed understanding of converging forces.
So why do you think we're at a time where we can't really predict with confidence what's happening? Has the world just changed so quickly that it's just a moot point to pretend like we can predict the future?
Yeah, so I think there's so much happening concurrently. That's where the difficulty comes. As if we studied and we went, like you said, we spoke across 800 people. And what we discovered was well over 100 distinct things individually that were happening that mattered. And frankly, they're converging. So that's that sheer amount of things happening and the pace of change of those things is really, really difficult. So as we studied those, and by the way, each one of those we studied deeply. We researched all, over 100 of those discrete things that are happening. And you discover that you may think you understand them. I know at least I thought I understand these topics until we got right out on the cutting edge. Like what's really happening so that we can begin to think about what's going to happen over the next decade. Just the sheer complexity of that is very, very difficult to try and make predictions against that backdrop.
Would you say that, let's start off with just being hopeful that, people still want to be excited about the future. They want to look at the potential for innovation, for problem solving. Would you say that this report, you're hopeful about the future, or is it more doom and gloom?
So I love that question because that question comes up. It came up so many times throughout the research, is that part of what we did is workshops. So I'd have groups of people, and one group of people would have the exact same information as another group. And the first group would say, oh my gosh, the future is dystopian because there's a real potential, right? Real potential for a dystopian future. And another group would have the exact same information and would say, oh my gosh, the future is going to be wonderful. It's utopia. And then, you think about predictions. Well, which one of those groups is right? Do you have to predict? Do you have to pick? And part of what I like to say is that they're both viable futures. And what we want to focus on are the choices that we have to make that get us to the future that we want. So the future isn't to be predicted, but it's rather to be forged, to be shaped. And so that's why we focus on the questions that are before us. We as executives, as owners of capital, as neighbors, as employees, we're the ones that will make the choices that will guide us one direction or another. And so I think the future is hopeful as long as collectively we employ our agency to actively think about what are those questions before us that help us navigate our way to the future.
Kasey, so I'm imagining this workshop that you did and all these people. Who are these people in these workshops? What are their jobs? What are their titles? And how did you find them?
Yeah, that's amazing. And I feel really, really lucky to have had the opportunity to spend so much time with so many various people. But Deloitte's a big company. We have really vast networks, and really I tapped into those networks. Of course, I've been in the industry for a long time, and I've got my own personal networks that I employed as well. But the 800 or so people that we engaged included a lot of people that are deep into the subsectors that are within the consumer industry, everything from auto, hotels, restaurants, retail, consumer products, et cetera. And a lot of those people are in Deloitte. Like we have a lot of experts in those areas, and I certainly tapped into those networks. But we went outside of Deloitte as well. So we've got a lot of clients, and we engage clients in the process. We engaged every major industry group. We had somebody from those industry groups who engaged with us in conversation. We had experts in things like economists, sociologists, or government policy. We engaged with think tanks, academia, Wall Street stock analysts, really a broad collection. And each one of them had a different perspective. What was so fascinating is no one person had all the information. And it was only because we could convene such a group could we really paint the mosaic of the complexity of what's before us. But that's ultimately what we did. We worked our way through the networks and the relationships that we have.
I understand that. But as far as the titles of the people, are they people with the word customer in their title? Are they CEOs? Are they directors of marketing? Like, could you be specific?
Yeah, so of course the answer is yes. With 800 people, what we ended up with was a really cool collection. We certainly had CMOs that were involved, people that are deep in marketing and customer. And of course, Deloitte's got a huge customer and marketing practice ourselves, and we had some of those folks involved. But we also had people from industries like life sciences. We had people from telco and technology involved as well. So to your specific question, the titles really ran the spectrum, and we didn't want to limit it to have discussions with people of only one title, but rather we wanted really a broad collection. So certainly C-suite were involved, but people across different disciplines.
Okay, I just asked because, selfishly, I do my own research too, and it is really hard to get timely feedback from busy business people. So I'm imagining, did you call them? Did you do surveys? You did workshops? Did you make sure that they were Fortune 1000 executives with a certain level of title? So like that, the thought leader content person in me is selfishly asking you these questions because I'm really curious.
Yeah, so we actually didn't limit. There was no title limit that said somebody has to be a certain seniority. In fact, we engaged some of the most junior people at our company to involve in the process because we know they have perspectives that are unique and different, and we wanted that level of diversity really involved. We've got something that we call the global state of the consumer tracker. And so this is where we go out and we actively survey consumers across 20 different countries, and we do this on a monthly basis. And we use that information as well to help as part of the input. So now think about that. We went everywhere from the consumer to the most junior person that participates at Deloitte to some of the more senior people. And by the way, part of the interesting part was how different the perspectives were, from people who are older in their career and people who are, younger and newer in their career, and how different even those questions of like, is it utopian or is it dystopian? Is it moving quickly? Do you believe it or not? Are you a naysayer? All those things show up. But really what I'm representing to you is that the diversity was key to the conversation. So it's very difficult for me to say the people we talked to were like this.
So for our audience who haven't read the report, it's called Buying Into Better, the Future of the Consumer Industry. Can you talk about the big tenets of the report and what you discovered?
Sure thing. The first thing we did, as I mentioned, surfaced these 100 or so, over 100 distinct things happening, and those were just too much. So we actually had to begin to organize those. We ended up organizing those into what we call the 6 forces. So we call it the 6 forces shaping the future of the industry. And we took all 100 topics and sort of put them under that organizing construct. And the kinds of things that show up in the 6 forces are things like the consumer is changing. Society and culture in which that consumer operates is also changing. And some of the constructs, some of the mechanisms that we organize as humans are really starting to change fairly significantly. We also know that technology is advancing at exponential rates, but it's not just infotech. You sort of have to open the aperture and realize that it's biotech, it's material sciences, it's a whole broad set of technologies that are all advancing and converging that oftentimes we in our role in the consumer industry maybe don't think about, but once you start thinking about them, you start seeing implications. We also know the industry itself, we call it, is in upheaval, and there's quite a few, if you just look at the financial strength of the players in the industry, where growth is coming from, declining barriers to entry, you begin to understand that. The planet is worsening. 60% of all greenhouse gases are produced by our industry. We've got about 3.9 billion consumers globally. We're going to add another 2 billion in the next decade. So where does that put us on a trajectory, and what role does our industry play? And then finally, geopolitics, policy, economics, and power. All these geopolitics and even politics within the nation, changes in the monetary policy and what that may mean to us. Things like the Inflation Reduction Act and what that's going to do to the industry. So anyway, those are broadly the 6 forces, and that's kind of the first key component. And I'll pause there. I can move on and talk about the second key tenet or the second key component of the research, but maybe I'll pause there and see if you have any questions about that.
Yeah, so just thinking about some of the trends you just listed, changing consumer, evolving society and culture, tech, industry upheaval, climate change, shifting economic policy. What are the things that you think would be most relevant for our listeners and viewers, that they see all these market dynamics, they see all of this in the news, and studies show that people are reading the news for 2 hours a day. They're spending an hour a day just talking about what they've read because they're so stressed out by it. They're
Yeah.
still trying to focus on what they do and how they can make their customers' life easier and better. So just in all of your research and reading all this stuff, which I would imagine a lot of my listeners and viewers go, yeah, like that makes sense. Like I already know that. What would you say is the most important thing to think about as the business people listening are trying to provide better experiences to their customers?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I've always tried to apply a practical lens to all the work that we've done and the research we've done. Um, and this idea about, I talk about the cutting edge. So, of those 100 topics, the thing is, I would have said I thought I understood them before we had taken on the work. Because you'll hear things like the consumer is becoming more diverse. There's changing sexuality and gender identity. And, I think I nod my head and go, I think I understood those. But here's what, at least for me, and maybe the listeners here are more, informed than I was, when we get out on the cutting edge. So instead of talking about averages, instead of talking about the population broadly, let's go to the cutting edge and let's just focus on Gen Z. If you take a look at the Gen Z makeup, on any one of those dimensions, one of the things that I find, and I'm spending a ton of time talking with clients about this, is that people don't really understand the pace and the degree of change that's before us. So oftentimes I'll say that our industry was built for the homogeneous consumer. Our industry was built for mass production, mass distribution, mass marketing. But that's a homogeneous consumer and a healthy middle class. When you begin looking at Gen Z along any dimension, whether it's racial, sexual preference, gender identity, economic, or even geographic, you'll discover that what the requirements that we built our industry for are not the requirements that serve that changing consumer. And the degree to which that change comes, when you really look at that cutting edge, I'm finding that most of the people I go to market and we're talking with don't really understand how dramatically different just that cutting edge slice is. The reason I say the cutting edge slice is because the consumer of the next decade, is Gen Z. And so you better understand that slice to understand where we're heading and how to get practical about reaching that consumer, marketing that consumer, and developing products and services that matter to a very different customer than what we built the industry for.
Yeah, I would say it's interesting. I have two little kids. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. So I've been able to kind of not pay attention as much to politics. But now as I'm getting older and my daughter is going into second grade, I'm starting to be aware of more of the politics and all this stuff. And it is kind of a tough spot for people of older generations, including myself, because I feel like there's so much disagreement as well on a lot of these topics that, we know the social media noise that, there's a lot of attention paid to some of these issues that I'm not sure everybody's in agreement on them, but, it's just a really complicated time. So how do you make decisions for your company that don't alienate all of your or some of your employees?
Yeah.
Because the louder employees are making noise, but maybe not everybody feels heard. So I think it's a really tough time to be any kind of manager today.
So I agree with you, but one of the implications you'll read about in our report, we'll talk deeply about the shift from mass to micro. Mm-hmm. So you heard me say we built our industry from mass, but you can see before us and you see in front of us is the need, the market, whether or not companies are doing this, the market is shifting to more, I call it micro, meaning products and services and channels and brands and formats that are, really becoming very targeted in their ability to serve consumers. But the same is true even as we talk about these topics where you go, well, there's some population that doesn't like this topic and there's another population that embraces this topic. There's, so along this idea, and even you can see it economically. If you look over the last decade at wealth accumulation, the difference between those who are 55 to 65 and those who are 25 to 35, you'll actually discover one of those cohorts, the first, has actually dramatically improved their wealth during that time period, and the other has gone negative. So just look at those two cohorts and recognize in that one example is they see the world very differently. They're experiencing the world very differently.
Are
And
you
they're both
saying that Gen Z has gotten poorer and baby boomers have gotten richer?
that's correct.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard about this that unfortunately with some, and I'm, I'm not here to make a political statement, but people have said that perhaps baby boomers are profiting off of policies that favor them and are going to be very bad for Gen Z as they get older. They don't have savings.
So if you just look at where value has been created, where wealth has been created in the last, just look at the last decade, it's appreciation of assets. So stock market appreciation, it's housing, and then you go, well, who owns stocks and who owns houses? It's disproportionate, and those who were able to participate in that, did much better than those who were unable to participate in that. Additionally, if you look at like wage growth, and there's been stagnant wage growth. Well, who is more dependent on wages? Who's more a supplier of capital to the market and who's more a supplier of labor to the market? You can begin to see that that's true. Now, I'm not going to take a statement that says this was, I would just look at the facts and say, this is true. This is what happens. So now the question is, okay, how do you reach those consumers? How do you recognize that they actually have different needs, wants, desires, different constraints? And that goes back to my point about mass to micro. I mentioned we're built for a homogeneous, big, healthy middle class. And what I'm talking about is fragmentation. I'm talking about diversity. I'm talking about, differences that start to show up and start to become magnified along those different dimensions. That's the reality. In addition, the market has had declining barriers to entry. So we have more options of competitors that are showing up at the market, and we're showing more needs and fragmentation of needs, wants, and desires. You put those two things together, and it's a true fragmentation of offers. Now, most of our big clients have had tried to respond by offering, oh, we've got more channels, optionality. We've got more brands.
Right.
We've got more service models. You can have it curbside delivered. You can pick it up. We can ship it to your... All that just represents the optionality that I'm talking about. And it's real in the market. And it actually tells us something about how we have to think differently about operating and facing off. It's a very practical view of what do we have to do differently to make sure that we're successful with this changing consumer and consumer market.
So a lot of my listeners are on the post-sale side. They manage contact centers, they manage customer loyalty programs. They're looking at, well, what happens if something breaks? What do you think are the implications of this report with this new normal for people that are managing transactions on the post-purchase side?
Well, again, I have the opportunity of taking a longer term view, so I'm going to comment on that. And this may be a little longer than even some of those people in those roles are thinking about. But one of the things we identified is really the rise of capability as a service. So if you begin to think about any of those capabilities you just described, most organizations today either own the infrastructure, the employees, the people, the capabilities, or maybe they outsource some of those things. But what you can begin to see is actually the rise of capabilities as a service to where we're moving to capabilities that are digitized as opposed to, oh, my humans can do it instead of your humans. That actually starts to have a pretty big implication about how we think about those capabilities, how we make choices, how we make investments, how we deploy capital. And I think that will have an impact on some of those functions that you called out, in the longer run. Mm-hmm. Now, in the shorter run, I'm not sure that I've got a really good answer for you about, the practical view of what do I have to do differently tomorrow. So I'll just point you towards the report and talk about, I think some of those functions will have pretty big implications over the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have a few more minutes before we just get to know you better in the rapid fire, but you see a lot of marketing now. Like you see companies responding to these market shifts and they'll just say like, oh, we embrace diversity and inclusion, or, oh, we're a sustainable fashion brand. And they're just in such a rush to tell everyone how innovative they are to look like, okay, we're paying attention to the future. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I talked about choices. And I actually think it's a really important part of the conversation is legitimate choices. I don't mean, glossing over with the latest statement of, we do this or we do that. Because I think increasingly the customers look for the authentic offers that actually are fulfilling the needs and wants and desires. So just saying it, I don't think is good enough. I think we actually have to make choices. But I also think that you can't, nor should you try and be all things to all people. We actually have to make those choices, and you can begin to see the companies that are really successful in the marketplace are the ones that are making conscious choices that really align with the brand values of a very targeted consumer that they care about. You mentioned before, how do you go about not upsetting somebody in this world? Well, the answer is if you try and not upset somebody, you have the risk of upsetting everybody. And there's tons of great examples of companies that have actually made these conscious choices about what they're going to embrace. And that's what I would encourage is deeply think about the consumer segments, who you're competing against, and what choices do you have to make to forge the future that we want.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk to leaders for a minute. The leaders that are listening, if they want to be more aware of the issues called out in the report, what's a good place to start other than the report? Like as far as even like looking in their own company or talking to people, like where should they start?
Yeah, well, as we went about it, right, it was really through conversations. Now, it takes a lot of investment, a lot of time and energy to go have the conversations and organize the information about what's really going on. But what I discover is that, we make this offer to clients. I call it the no risk offer. Hey, we did a bunch of work. Are you interested in hearing about it? And that no risk offer, I'm not finding anybody that says, nah, I'm not interested in that. Mm-hmm. What I find is people who say, boy, we don't have any time to think about those topics. We'd love to hear about those topics because we don't have the time. And so what you've got to do is you've got to find those partners, whether it's us or somebody else that actually has made the time to invest, because there's so much complexity that you need some organizing construct. So what I'd just encourage is find the right partners that are making the right investments, and then spend time listening and understanding and going into it with an open mind.
Yeah, and I think that Deloitte content, knowledge, research has just become so important in a time when there's just everything is a commodity. So what actually matters? Well, it's how you think about things. It's things that you can't see. So that's an interesting job that you've had where now in the last few years, I think Deloitte has this incredible advantage. Content and research is your thing.
Well, there's two sides to that. One is that, yes, we do great content and research. I'm very proud of the work that my colleagues do and that I've had the opportunity of doing. But we also help our clients translate it to what does it mean for me? And I always use this example. If you went back 20 years and the conventional wisdom of retail was online, everything's going to be e-commerce. Mm-hmm. And really, if you went back in time and you looked, you go, yep, there are some companies that were very successful in e-commerce, but at the same time, there were other companies that were successful with dollar stores or off price. So the answer is you've got to understand the forces that are coming together, and then you've got to work through what it means for me and how do you translate that down to a set of choices that I'm going to consciously make. So even at the highest level, the conventional wisdom level is too simplistic. So what I'm proud about with Deloitte in particular is we couple the research with the ability to help our clients work through what are the implications and what are the strategic choices that I have within that construct. Without the latter, the former, really struggles to create the value that we're hoping to make with our clients.
Well, let's get to know you a little bit better, Kasey, before we wrap up. Are you ready to take some rapid fire questions and not think about research? You ready?
I think so. We'll give it a shot.
Okay. Number one, what does your morning routine look like?
Oh, so my morning routine, I am not a jump out of bed person.
Okay.
My wife is. She's on the treadmill like way before me. So I'll wake up and I actually spend some time scrolling through social media. And I've curated my collection of who I follow to be really informative on many of the topics that we're talking about. And I'll find 3 or 4 interesting things in the morning and I'll forward them to myself, and those become part of the base of research that I have. So I'll call it, 15 or 20 minutes worth of research.
All right. What is your favorite leadership book or resource?
Oh, like most recently, I think I have it up behind me. All In on AI is this book that we've recently published at Deloitte, and it's my passion right now. So that's what I'd put forward as really this deep understanding of where are we heading on that topic.
What's your idea of perfect happiness?
Oh boy, perfect happiness. It's probably, I've got two kids, 17 and 16-year-old. They're very athletic and into sports, and I love it. So I love watching them compete and grow and play and find success. If I could, if I did that every day, I'd be happy with that.
That's a great answer. What is one mental health strategy for managing hard days?
Exercise. That's my, like, make time to exercise is very important. And I'm pretty good at it. I'm not perfect at it. But what I find is it gives me an opportunity to take a deep breath, reinvigorate my body and my mind. And that's what I suggest for anybody is make the time.
What is your favorite type of vacation?
Oh, travel. Travel. Love traveling with the family. I love going places, interesting places. We've been Italy and Africa were two of my most interesting places. Australia, love it. So I love to travel.
If you could have lunch with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
Uh, I think maybe Abraham Lincoln. I'm a big fan of and really hold him in high regard for his ability to have vision, to be bold, and to shape us into the country that we've become. So I'd probably sit down with him and try and understand where that came from.
And lastly, if you had to describe your outlook in one quick motto, what would it be?
I think I'm optimistic. Maybe that's not a motto, but I'm very optimistic about where we're heading. And I love this idea that the future is not to be predicted, but it's to be created. And that's really where I'm spending my time and energy today, is trying to bring that message to people.
Well, Kasey, this has been really fun. Thank you for joining the show to talk about the new report, The Future of the Consumer Industry, Buying Into Better. We'll be providing a link in the show notes to this report, and I just really appreciate you being here today.
Oh, amazing. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. Anytime we could talk about this topic, I'm ready.
All right, Kasey. Well, all of you have been tuning into the Modern Customer Podcast. Until next time.